Alrighty, hello and welcome everyone. I'm Tan. I'm here with Linkso, and I have Andrea Hurd from Mariposa Gardening and Design Cooperative. And she's going to be doing a fantastic talk today on the art and science of lithohydrology. So without further ado, Andrea, welcome. The floor is all yours, and I'll go ahead and read the questions throughout your talk.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ken. So my name is Andrea. I am the founder and one of the co-owners of Mariposa Gardening and Design Cooperative. We build gardens through listening to the natural world, replicating nature, and finding ways to build gardens that are more in line with the way natural ecosystems work. Today, we're going to be talking about what I call lithohydrology. We use a lot of stonework in our gardens, and we do a lot of water, what we call water harvesting and water management with the stone that we use, and we're going to be talking about that today. Mariposa Gardening and Design started in 2005 after I'd been working and building gardens at that point for many years, and we became a worker-owned cooperative in 2016. So that means that all of our employees are given the opportunity to become owners at our company. And through that process, we work to educate and train the new generations coming up to be business owners, to be in the landscaping industry, which is historically a very exploitative industry. And we try to work with people to help them work to be creating beautiful works of art that are using the earth to utilize our resources, such as water, in the best way possible to create lush and beautiful gardens. So today what we're talking about is managing water with stone. I started working in stone when I started doing landscaping, which would be sometime in the 90s. And I just did a lot of self-teaching. And then in 2007, got involved with the Stone Foundation, which is an international organization of stonemasons that gather on an annual basis, at least minimally, to get together and learn from each other and from the masters that are out there all over the world, how to build stone in a way where we're not using any mortar, but we're figuring out all of the ancient techniques of building with stone and working with stone masters who have had those techniques passed down to them through the generations. And so as someone who studied permaculture in 1991 and has been practicing water harvesting all these years, utilizing stone and mixing water harvesting is what I'm calling lithohydrology. So it's the use of stone and harvesting your water and managing your water, and then, which is especially important during these times when we're in a drought. Okay, so I am going to figure out how to. Sorry, this part I didn't practice. Oh, look, I just had to do that. Okay. So lithohydrology, using stone structures to harvest the water that naturally falls in your garden. So we use dry laid stones. So that's the technique of working with stones with no mortar. We don't use any mortar. We don't use any concrete. The creation of concrete is basically burning a lot of stone material, which creates a lot of CFOs that go into the atmosphere and destroy the ozone layer. So we don't like to use concrete. And we don't need to use concrete because honestly, using dry laid stonework allows water to move through your structures naturally. They last a lot longer, and you don't have to use any toxic chemicals to create them, just artistry. And so our interest in lithohydrology is to keep the water that falls on your property by moving it around away from your structures and your foundations, so that it can be used to replenish the groundwater table. So a lot of things, I do a lot of different types of presentations, but I always come back to this graphic of the water cycle, because I think in these days when we're having drought situations, we aren't really thinking about what the water cycle is. We're thinking, oh, we need to save water, so let's keep water out of our landscape. Let's not put water on the ground. And that for municipalities, especially, the education around conserving water, the first solution for them is to stop watering your garden. But as far as I'm concerned, that's the last solution. The first solution should be to take shorter showers, to figure out how to deal with the amount of water that your toilet is flushing, and all those kinds of things within the home. The best thing that you can do with water that comes out of your tap is to put it into the ground because of the drought conditions and the firestorms, especially we've been having in California and in the West. Dry soils sort of suck moisture out of the air and create harder, harsher, drier conditions for your plants, drier conditions, which create worse fire situations. So can you all see my cursor?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so the water cycle depends on clouds forming, raining, rainwater falls through the landscapes, gets into our waterways, goes in down through the different layers of the soil, and then transpiration through plants helps create more clouds. So this cycle can't happen if you stop watering your garden. If you stop watering your garden and you put in some type of hardscape or stonescape or whatever, you're actually just drying this soils out more so that we can't create clouds. So that's why I'm always talking about watering your garden. That doesn't mean you have to water your garden like it's a lawn that needs a lot of water, that you're, wasting water. There's lots of ways you can water your garden. And that's what we're going to talk about in this presentation, keeping water on your property. Does anybody have any questions about this concept? Okay, I'm gonna move on. So we are a design build company, and replicating nature is what we try to do in all of our designs. And so what you're seeing here is a garden where you can do what our tagline is, which is to find your home in nature. And so I think we all need, especially in these stressful times, ways to connect with nature and the natural world. What you're looking at is an all dry stack stone patio, a dry stack stone wall that's holding up the grade. Before this garden was built, there was a brick wall that came way up really close to the house. We pulled back the grade, retained it with a retaining wall, and opened up this space. And then we put in some stone steps. And we're going to talk more about how all of those structures work to keep water away from your foundation, but actually take the water either from your downspouts or from the water that falls from the sky and keep it in the landscape and recharging your groundwater table. So when we're designing, the first thing that we come to is what are existing grades and how is the rain falling onto this piece of property and where is it going? So existing grades are whatever, a lot of times existing grades will be determined by the landscaping that had happened previously. Sometimes we'll come into a garden where the existing grade is actually putting water towards the house and then through a French drain to take it out. And so rather than that level of construction, we're always talking about moving and reshaping and sculpting the existing grade to harvest the water away from your house, away from your foundation, whether it's your home, it's your garage, whatever, away from those structures that are going to be damaged by water, but back into the landscape so that we can put the water where we want it. Improving and increasing your groundwater table is on your property is going to mean that you need to use less water when you're doing your landscaping. You'll need to use less water when you're irrigating your garden because your groundwater table will be higher and your plants, especially trees, will have longer, deeper access to that water. So slow it, sink it, spread it is kind of the tagline for the water harvesting movement, if that's what we want to call it. In this image, you're seeing the above ground final version, recently finished version of a landscape where we've created what's called a dry well. So basically, if you can see my cursor, I think it's somewhere around here that you can't really see in the picture is a downspout. So from that downspout, we actually created a trench with gravel, just gravel. we weren't trying to put gravel, we aren't trying to put the water into a tube and create a point source, and we'll talk about that later, but just gravel, and enough gravel so that the water can actually move through the landscape slowly. We aren't trying to create a point source of water, but we're trying to move it through the landscape slowly. Predominantly, it's going to move underneath this path that we've covered with flagstone. There's a path, and then under this structure is a dry well where more water, as it needs to, can fill if there's a big rain event. So it's actually taking water away from the foundation, putting it out into the landscape. And then the way this structure is used in the landscape is, as you can see, as a seating area, and was designed to also be a fire pit. So you could build a fire here if you wanted to. So dry laid stonework. So in thinking about ways that nature naturally works, we determined that dry laid stonework is the best way to actually move water through your landscape. There's no mortar. I always tell our clients that the training that we've had from the Stone Foundation and the trainings that I've done over the years allows us to know that even like we're always striving to build 200 to 300 year long lasting walls. So I always tell our clients, our stone walls are going to last longer than your home. So you're not going to have to rebuild it. It's not a retaining wall that has to be, changed up over the years. It's permanent. But it's also permeable. And that's the important thing in terms of thinking about lithohydrology and moving water through your landscape. Water can move through the stone wall. You don't have to put in pipes and things and create, again, that point source of water. Water is just allowed to slowly sink and spread through your garden, and so that the water that falls in your garden stays in your garden. Here's just, I'm going to show lots of beautiful pictures of gardens and stonework. And then we're going to sort of dig a little bit deeper, and I'll show you some construction documents and things like that of what these images are actually doing in the landscape. Underneath all these stone steps, underneath this patio and underneath this wall, we have graded what we call the pan grade, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. We have graded the pan grade so that water is being directed where we want it. And typically where we want it is into the planting beds, right? So all of these materials are permeable. And the pan grade so water is going to flow through them, it's going to hit the pan grade, and then it's going to move towards our planted areas and sink into the ground deeply. Here's another example of a slope with a different kind of stone structure on it. But again, water is moving from their downspouts into the landscape through these dry stacked stone features and then being held onto the landscape. Another thing about stone in terms of keeping things ecologically minded is that we typically use locally sourced stone. So Napa basalt, Sonoma fieldstone, Old Town wall stone, lots of types of ledge stone, Arizona flagstone. We use Connecticut bluestone. It is local, not to the West. It is local to the US. Arizona flagstone is local to the West, and all of the other types of stones are local to the West. Connecticut bluestone, even though it's got to be shipped across the country, it's still considered to be much more sustainable than wood. And I have mixed feelings about Connecticut bluestone because it does have to be shipped and it's not technically local to the West. However, there are a lot of people that live out here that have an emotional connection to the Connecticut or to any kind of bluestone because it does hail from where they're from. And it is a beautiful material that also has a lot of other ecological uses. So these are the typical stones that we use. This is a Sonoma fieldstone. It's got the nice mossy look on it. Here's some ledgestone that's from, I believe, Montana, with the Mariposa slate that was more local, which you can no longer get. Stone is also a low impact building material. It's very durable. It lasts a very long time. It has relatively low embodied energy. So it doesn't have, there's not a lot of energy used to produce the material. not toxic, the low amount of waste that can stay on site and out of the landfill. So we do a lot of work to repurpose all of the trimmings and things like that into the landscape, and keeping them on the landscape instead of sending all of the residue to the material, which with wood construction, for example, you're gonna have a lot of extra pieces that aren't usable, that those all go to the landfill. It has a smaller footprint of impact. So rather than wood where, you know, large tracts of land have to be clear cut and reforested, stone has a smaller footprint because you are harvesting deep into the earth to extract it. And then again, a lot of our material is locally sourced. Here is a beautiful pathway made out of Connecticut bluestone. There's a lot of variation in our Connecticut bluestone that we can use. Here are some retaining walls built out of a mixture of stone. We've got Arizona flagstone, we've got Connecticut bluestone, we've got ledge stone. We like to mix our stones as well and be creative with them. So modern construction really wants to tell us that we have to take water off the property. You know, and whenever I go to a new site or whenever I'm talking to other architects or, you know, landscape contractors, they're talking about how we need to move water off the property. So, you know, there is this aversion, it's this like this strange dichotomy, like we're in a drought and we need our gardens to be watered for the transpiration so that we can keep making clouds, so that we can keep having rain, which I talked about earlier. But we want to we don't want to waste our water in our landscape. And so there's this water aversion where we're trying to like not water our gardens, but also the rain that falls in our gardens, we're trying to take it out and put it into the streets and put it into the sewers. And the problem with that is that rainwater is seen as a waste material rather than as a resource. So the water that we are adverse to when it rains and we don't want it to flood our basements and we're trying to get it out into the streets and away from it becomes a waste source rather than a resource. And when we move that water out into the street, we are also pulling with it all of the chemicals and all of the gas and all of the oil and all of the materials that are in our streets, which are pollution, and we're putting them into the bay area, basically here. We're putting it into the bay, or we're putting it into our waterways. So I always talk about water as a point source when we're talking about water as being a waste source. So our downspouts take water, and sometimes we'll have a French drain. And again, that takes water and puts it into a pipe or a tube and moves it to a specific point. Well, when it's at that point and you have a large volume of it, then it just becomes a waste source. So creating that waste source or that point source of water is actually the issue. And it's not thinking about how ecological systems work. And it's not thinking about what we can do to think of like, we need water in our gardens. We need water because we're in a drought and we're concerned about watering our gardens. And yet we're diverting it away from our gardens. We're diverting it away from our landscapes. And so if we can take water, free it from the pipes, free your water from your pipes, and put it into your landscape and slow it, sink it, spread it. That is a much, much more healthy way to deal with water in your garden. So here's a little diagram. It's one of our construction documents of a garden that we actually worked on, and you'll see some pictures of the working on it. And so this is a little bit of what we're talking about, and we're going to get into this a lot more detail. But this red line you can see is our existing grade. And so it's basically for this garden that we did and we built, the existing grade was going flat, if not a little bit towards the house. This is the house, residence, and the foundation. However, by doing a little bit of grading, pulling out the grade in front of the house, doing grading that actually, you can see this blue squiggly line is indicating that your pan grade is moving away from the house, then you can, and water wants to fall at its lowest point. We'll talk more about that in a minute. If you're moving that water away from your house, and then we put on top of it drain rock, decorative gravel, and then a soft, and then a flagstone patio in front of it, you'll be moving water away from your house, but you're going to slow it, you're going to sink it, you're going to spread it, and you're going to move it into the landscape, into your planted areas. Is this, can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to get it out of there because it's in the way of the picture. Okay.
Oh, no, I don't know. I see the picture. I'm not sure what else.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we like to work with nature rather than against nature. So here's an example of a pan grade that we worked on recently. So after we did the water test, you can see the water is pooling up in this edge. So what you're seeing here is the edge of the patio that was built. And you're seeing how water doesn't sit here on the pan grade. And for most of us, our pan grades are clay. And so they're heavy and they don't percolate quickly, right? And so the water is just going to sit there. So if you've got a low spot here right in front of your foundation, water is going to sit right there in front of your foundation. And it could go into your basement or could cause cracks in your foundation. However, with regrading the pan grade, we effectively move water away from the foundation and into our planted areas. And this is what we call water harvesting. So water harvesting is essentially exactly what it says, harvesting the water, using the water that falls on your property, finding a way to redirect it to where you want it to go. So sometimes what we'll do is we'll build a trench, and that's what this is right here. You can see that its high point is right here, and its low point is down here. Water always wants to move to its low point. No matter what you do, water's always going to go to its low point. And that's great. It's easy, gravity. You can direct your water to wherever you want it to go by creating the place where you want your water to build up, and this is your low point, and where it's falling or where it's entering is your high point. Can't see it right here, but this is the house and this is the fence. And you can see in this picture, the grade is going down into this trench, filling up down here, which happens to be in front of a tree. So here you can see, actually, to be clear, that trench we just saw was right, and that pit was right in front of this tree, but here's another example of the same idea. And then we fill it with drain rock. And that drain, and water is allowed to move through the drain rock slowly into the area where you want it to actually pool, if that's what you want it to do. And again, this area right here is in front of a fruit tree. This area right here is in front of another fruit tree. So you've got water kind of pooling right in front of your fruit trees so that it allows that groundwater table to build up so that you don't actually have to irrigate your fruit trees as much. Here's another construction document, if you will, of what the concept that we're talking about. So here's your house. Water is going to fall down and your pan grade slopes at a 2%. And then we put drain rock on top of it and decorative gravel on top of that. So your finished grade is perfectly level. But what's happening underneath the ground is that water is percolating through that drainage material, that permeable material, and moving down towards your planted areas, just like in the picture that we saw earlier, and gathering here, far away from your house. We try to get it at least 10 feet, if not more, away from your house. So if we did have a large rain event, water would be flooding these areas before they would get close to your house. And hopefully never would get close to your house, because this area over here is long and wide. And again, the slow it, sink it, spread it idea, so that the water has plenty of area to spread out before it could ever get close to your foundation. Here's an example of a pathway along the side of a house. You can see we've excavated it. This is your pan grade. And it is hard to see, but what's going on in this picture is this is the edge, this is the planted area, And the team is going through and excavating and grading away from the house towards this edge, away from the house towards this edge. In this particular example, you can see from the foundation that the slope is also going this direction. So this path is also sloping this direction. So it's sloping away from the house and this direction. So water is going to be gathering here and then moving into the landscape this way. And on this side, what you can see, here's our trusty tamper. You can see the top level of decorative gravel that's gone on top of this path. And so underneath, what's happening is that the water is falling, when it rains, the water's falling onto this path, and then it's moving out into the landscape in this direction. Here is another example of the team. And you can sort of see this in this picture. This is our drain rock layer or base rock layer. It's moving towards a stone wall, which also has a footer, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But the pan grade is moving all away from the house, right? So the pan grade, so when the water falls, it goes through this material that drains well. You can see that somebody's checking the level just to make sure that it's, you know, going away from the house or in the direction that we wanted it to. Actually, this base layer can be more level. This is what I think this is. And yeah, so moving away from the house so that water is going to actually collect into the footer of this wall. One of the features that we talk a lot about and that we do in pretty much all of our gardens is a crevice feature. So this is a great illustration of what a crevice feature is. I mean, that's just what we call it. Basically, we take a lot of our leftover pieces of stone, flagstone, whatever. So water is going to come out of your downspout, and underneath here, and I apologize because I didn't have a great diagram to show this, or couldn't find one. But basically, you've got underneath this stone right here, same idea. You've got a lot of drain rock that's moving the water away from the house and the foundation that falls through the downspout and down into the garden. Here's another example of our crevice feature. And then on top of it is this is decorative gravel. Underneath that is drain rock. All of the pan grade has been graded away so that you can get the water away from the house. The other thing we use a lot of is permeable surfaces. So this is an example of a driveway that they weren't parking in. You could, but they weren't. This path is just to get to the back of the house, but it's completely permeable surface. Underneath here, again, you've got downspouts that are going into this area, and you've got your pan grade graded away from the house with drain rock and then a decorative gravel material over the top of it. And this, again, to get water away from your lands or your house and into the landscape. Here's a driveway section of an interesting situation that we came up on that I wanted to just show you in terms of, like, there's a lot of ways that you can move water through the landscape. So we had a job where the garage, the base of the garage, was lower than the sidewalk. And with a concrete driveway, what's going to happen is the water is going to, you know, rain's going to fall in here and water is going to all collect over here right by the garage. And a lot of times when that happens, you will have some sort of a drain in front of there that's going to, again, move water from your driveway away from your house, but back out into some sort of a system that isn't actually thinking about how we're using water, how we're saving water, how we're protecting our environment. It's just seeing water as a waste source and getting it away. So in this instance, what we did is we excavated down. We removed the pan grade at a 2% grade away from the house. We created a trench, which you can see here, pitched pan grade to planted edges. So the trench in the middle of the driveway was pitched out to the planted areas. And then from the sidewalk, again, we had a 2% slope that came down into this trench. Over the top of that, we put in drain rock and then decorative gravel and some ledge stone on the edges to hold in the decorative gravel so that we could have there's also some ledge stone right here, so that we could have a driveway that was permeable, that took in all the water, but actually moved it out to the sides. This is not that driveway, but is an example of a permeable driveway. A lot of times we'll just put in the gravel. So you've got, again, your house, your pan grade is graded away towards your planted areas. And we put down the drain walk, we put down the decorative gravel, and then we put in these ledge stones for the car to be able to drive on. Here's another example of the same idea. Again, everything is graded away from the house and the water is mysteriously moving underneath the grade in order to put it into our planted areas.
Andrea, quick question regarding this particular driveway. I know cars and vehicles are quite heavy, and having some ledge stone be installed in such way, would they tend to move freely, in comparison to large format mortared in stones? How would, is it sort of like ever changing driveway in a way, or moving, I should say?
That's a really good question. A lot of people think that, and the answer is no. For a driveway, we're going to go down deeper than 6 inches than we would deeper than the 6 inches that we would go down for a patio. So for a driveway, we're going down a little bit deeper, and we're putting in the base rock and the drain rock so that it's more stable. And then we're putting in the decorative gravel that we're setting the stones into. So there's a very deep stone base. The base rock and the drain rock is also tamped with our tamper so that it's really nice and solid. And then we carefully set each one of those pieces of stone into that so that it can't move. And they don't move. They don't move at all. Once we set our stones, they're there. But those ledge stones, they're not thin. They're at least 4 to 6 inches deep.
Okay, awesome.
Each one of those stones, yeah.
This you would recommend for a residential application rather than a commercial, or would this work for like a commercial application as well?
It would work for commercial. It would work for either.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Here's another driveway that we love to do. We call those our meadow driveways. It's really beautiful. It grows in green. You can have it just be completely filled in. Sometimes people like to see these little waffles, and this is a little, this is a product that we buy that is basically a 2 foot by 2 foot section of these little waffles, as you can see. That's what they're called. I don't know what else to call them. That you can put soil in and have plants grow through, and also keep the structure of your driveway. And I'll just show you a little cross section of how we build those. So we've got our native soil, which again is going to be graded in whatever direction we need it to be graded in, the pan grade is. And then we put down our base rock, 4 inches of base rock on top of that. And then we're going to be putting in a particular mix of soil on top of that. And then here comes in those waffles. And so those waffles have these holes that will provide drainage, and then we put soil on top of that, and then we plant in the plugs. I'm just noticing that this is only showing 4 inches of base rock. I think that's too little. I think we do more than that. I would have to look at, they have a standard up. I think it's more like 6 inches. Regardless, it's all tamped in, and you can drive over it. It's perfectly stable. We have several of them that have lasted for years, and it keeps that beautiful meadow look. So dry stuck stone walls and steps, something that we're known for. They are ecologically friendly, and they last for a long time, and they also allow water to move through the landscape. And when you do that, you can really sculpt and shape the landscape in whatever way that you want to. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is our footer. So your existing grade is going to be kind of where this dotted line is. So that, or your final grade. So that's, if you pull out from that, underneath this dotted line is what you have. First of all, you have a 1 foot footer. And you're going to fill that footer with drain rock. and then you're going to build your stone wall on top of it. And you can direct by sculpting this pan grade which direction you want water to flow. So if this is a retaining wall, water is going to land back here, flow down into your footer, and then you can also push water in whichever direction you want it to go in from there. So here's some examples. Here is an example of a footer where they've just started to put the drain rock into it. So you can see the drain rock is going to be filled all the way up to here, and then the wall will be built on top of that. Here's an example of a wall going in with the part that's being retained behind it, and the wall is being built on top of the footer. And you can see in front of it, in this particular garden, we had a patio in front of it that would drain into the footer. And that's pretty common for us. A lot of times this slope maybe came down real close to the house, and we'll dig it out, push it out, and so that we have more space for living. Here's kind of an example, and I apologize. I know that somewhere we have a better drawing of this, but anyways, this is kind of my sketchy drawing. Here's the face of the wall. If it's a retaining wall, we have our footer here. We're always building with the stones sloping into the wall. Again, if there's an earthquake, all those stones are going to jiggle in tighter towards each other. Same thing with a freestanding wall. So this is a freestanding wall. Every time we build on a freestanding wall, we're pointing the stones from the face in so that gravity is going to do our work for us and keeping it strong. We have harding behind our walls. We're in the middle of our walls. So we've got a footer, stone on top of it, harding in the middle. This is your retaining wall. This is the area that you're retaining. So water is going to fall into the landscape, and then it's going to go down here and into your drain rock. Very rarely does it flow out from the wall. I've never actually seen it flown out from the wall, because we do build the walls leaning in towards the hill that we're trying to retain, or in towards each other. So here's an example of a retaining wall in the process of being constructed. Harding is bigger stones, and then we fill in with drain rock in between. It may be hard to tell, but those stones are leaning in towards the wall. The wall also has a batter that leans in towards the hillside to keep it nice and strong, and to maintain the hold on that hillside. Again, if there's an earthquake, all of these stones are just going to move. If they move, they're going to move in towards the hillside and not fall out. And here is that wall, that same wall, finished. With a dry stone patio in front of it. It's hard to tell, but the house is right here, and the grade is all moving towards this footer and towards the wall. So all of the water is being directed away from the house.
And Andrea, if you go back a couple slides where with that retaining wall diagram that you had showed, can you use that same concept to retain, moisture or retain water within the land where the land is really, really sloped? Can you use this technique to prevent erosion, in other words?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, this garden, maybe we're going to see some more pictures, but a lot of the gardens that we get are in the hills. And this, you can see that back here, there's the house and stuff, but up above that area is just a super, super steep hillside. And we'll look at some pictures of that. But yes, this, the amount of stone that's being put into this wall is several tons of stone. And even though it's not mortared, because of the way that we're using gravity, we're moving the stone, we're leaning the stones in towards the hillside, we're backfilling with a lot of material. And the backfill is also a lot of pieces that are constructed to help hold everything in tight, the way the joints are. This hillside is stable, very, very stable. It's not going to move. We do use these to prevent any kind of movement in our construction.
Thank you.
Yeah. So here's another document that sort of illustrates shaping the pan grade. So here is a house, right? And then there's this porch. And the existing grade is this dotted line when we came to the site. So the sidewalk or the street is up here, and the existing grade kind of slopes all the way down to this porch. And so a lot of times in conventional construction, what will happen is the solution will be to build some sort of a French drain here and direct it again out towards the, away from the house, out towards the street, out towards the sewer, just away from the property. So what we do is we redo the existing grade. And what we're doing is we're developing a new pan grade that slopes away from the house and will move water away from the house through this drainage material into an area that's planted or that can accommodate that water. Again, here's an existing, this is a seeding wall, and we're going to see some pictures of this constructed. This is a seeding wall. There's drain rock below it and behind it. So as the water is flowing down from the street here, this is our final grade, but this is compost material. Our pan grade is flowing into here, and we're collecting water in here, which we're sloping in whatever direction we determine we want the water to go, side to side. So here we have our team. This is the same garden. Once we took out the existing concrete, we determine our grade right here next to the foundation. And then what you can see them doing here is determining the grade out here, the lowest point away from the foundation. So this point out here that they're digging into is going to be at least a 2% slope from whatever this final grade. So the water is going to move in this direction. And once we get that final grade, then we move backwards and slope it out. And this is a picture of that same space. This is where they were digging. They were digging out to this point. So they were going from this patio all the way out to here, 2% slope, and moving the water in here. And then what's built on top is a stone patio. Same patio. Again, here's the house moving towards this feature, this water feature right here. So water is collecting on this edge where we planted. And this is that slope from the street down to where this stone bench is. And as you saw, there's a footer under here. So water that's moving into the property this direction is collecting in here and moving into our planted areas. Does anybody have any questions about that?
So right now I see that you've got a lot of mulch, but I'm guessing this is pre-planting photo here, and this is okay.
Yeah, it is unusual for us to just have mulch. That's true. It was a good project to have the illustration. I don't have the final planted, but because of the mulch, it was actually good for the illustration of this. The client wanted to do their own planting, and they were going to be planting several months after we did the hardscape, so that's why we just had mulch down.
Yeah, no worries.
I just wanted
to clarify. Yeah,
yeah,
I know a lot of folks looking at this is like, wait a minute, like, is this going to be okay if I don't plant on like a sloped or hillside? And I know that's probably not a good idea.
No, you do want to do the planting. This is pre-planting, just hardscapes pre-planting, which makes it really great for the illustration of the concept. But yeah, once this is planted, again, you're going to have the plants are going to also like absorb water that's moving through the landscape as well. So in some ways, what we do is a bit of an overcompensation. But if you do, like we've been having these flooding events, in a flooding event, it's definitely going to work to keep water away from your foundation. But most of the time with that planted, you're not going to have a lot of problems with that, with any flooding. If you didn't plant it, it would be another issue. Yeah. You didn't plan it to be another issue. And so here we have dry laid flagstone steps, which is another feature that we do a lot of in our gardens. And again, you can see from this point right here, our first step, we're putting in a 12-inch footer, 1 foot below depth below our final grade. And then we try to kind of keep that measurement going throughout here. So this is just an example. I guess there was a decorative gravel patio up here and then stone steps. And then we have 3 inches of drain rock and a gravel patio in front of our steps. So you can see like water, this is all an area where water can be moved through, absorbed, and filtered into the landscape. Here is an example of building some dry laid flagstone steps. You can see there's a lot of big chunks of harding material behind the steps. Underneath here is your 12-inch footer below this step, and then there's all of this dry material behind it as well. Here are those same steps built. Patio here, and another wall that has, again, a 12-inch footer below it right here. And I don't have the before photos in here, but this was just, you can see it's a cut, sloped landscape that came, and the house is over in this direction, coming close to the door. Again, we just cut it back, put this in, directed the water away from the house. And here is the wall that's finished, the steps that are finished, the patio unfinished, but you can see we were in the process of tamping it right here. And that allowed us to cut into this sloped area that, again, came towards the house of the door, give them a larger patio and access up to the garden that was easy to get to. Here's another set of stone steps, again, to get you to another section of the garden where we've done some retaining in order to adjust the slope and get us more space in the garden, but also direct the water away from the house. More steps for fun. More steps. Again, by moving water underneath these steps, we're flowing them into the planted areas and allowing those planted areas to need less water.
Andrea, quick question regarding the stairs that you had just shown there. Could you talk to us about the kind of stones that are sort of semi-permeable? There's a lot of makeup of stones. What stones do you prefer to use in your applications?
Well, I personally, I'm always trying to direct our clients into using the more local stones. So what you see right here is an Arizona flagstone. I like to use the Arizona flagstone as a builder because it is a softer stone. It is more permeable as a stone itself, and it's softer and it's easier to work. I like the aesthetic and I like the look of the stones. And I think the nice warm colors in the Arizona flagstone are a really good complement, as you can see in this picture, to the greens and the warmer colors that tend to be in the garden. But I also really like Napa basalt. I think that's a fine stone to use. The permeability of stone doesn't necessarily come from the soaking action through the stone, though that is going to happen in these, but in the joint work in between the stones. We also, are careful about how we grade each step. So there's grading down. So the water is always going to also be flowing down, not into this crevice right here, but down. So there's also moving water. Again, this is a dry laid patio, so it's going to be moving water into the patio and away from the house. Does that answer your question, Cam?
Yeah, absolutely. I know one of the common questions, working in the stone industry is, hey, can I use, like granite or basalt or sandstone or bluestone? The different stones have different geological makeup. So, some stones are much slicker and it's very dense, and like the flagstone that you're using here, the Arizona, is very porous, sandstone-like. So I just wanted to clarify that for our audience here today.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. And we tend more towards that, or even the Connecticut bluestone for these practices rather than slate, for example. And we've done a lot of slate, but it is more slippery because it is a more dense stone. It's also a lot harder to work with than these stones. Again, we talked about this already a little bit, but here's a dry well, just getting back to it, our downspout. We dig a trench, like you saw before in those other pictures, the trench, we fill it with drain rock. And then underneath here is a large pit. So we actually had all of the downspouts from the back of the house directed through trenches into this area to keep water away from the house. And again, we just doubled it as a fire pit and a place to sit. So we've already talked about this, that water, most homes are directing your rainwater from your downspouts into the streets or from a French drain into the sewer. The going into the streets is particularly bad because as it goes into the streets, it picks up all the dirt and all the chemicals and has a toxic effect in our bay. And it kills a lot of the wildlife in our bay and a lot of the organisms, the microorganisms, and really damages the health of the water there and in any waterways that water will go to. We are constantly trying to use our design techniques of replicating nature to move water away from foundations and keep it in the landscape so that we can keep the soil hydrated. We want plants to grow there. We don't want to use a pipe and we don't want to create a point source of water. We want it to slow it, sink it, and spread it so that we don't need to use as much irrigation in our landscapes. So I just have a few more images of some of our stonework. Again, here's a patio and a crevice feature in front of the house that's got all this material under it, moving water away from the house and into the landscape. So that is the extent of my slides. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you. That's a fabulous presentation. I'm sure every one of us here learned a whole bunch of stuff about retaining water within the land. Could you talk a little bit about perhaps creating like a habitat garden that goes along with your stonework? I know that the topic today is about water harvesting, how that kind of ties in with the softscaping around the hardscapes. That may be beneficial to the ecology and the flora and fauna nearby. So
I'm sorry, so can you explain your question? Like how does the softscaping work with the hardscaping? Is that what you're asking?
yeah, like a symbiotic relationship, if there is any, between creating like such a beautiful hardscape and then incorporating softscape that can invite, the diversity to your garden in a way, creating like a habitat garden essentially.
Okay. Perfect. So this is a great garden to answer that question on. So we do different in our gardens and in our softscapes. So we do our hardscapes, which is all about like creating movable space, usable space in the garden, which all hardscapes do, but then also thinking about how we can move water through the garden with our hardscapes. And then once we've figured out how we can move water through the garden, we have areas that can be planted that will be benefiting from this extra water. We think about what we're planting in them. So we have a few different, and we are a company and we do build a lot of gardens every year and we need everything to be sort of replicable. And so we have specific planted areas that we integrate into the garden in a lot of different ways and a lot of different configurations, but they're all based on basic ecological concepts. And so one of the basic ecological concepts that we use a lot is the concept of the edge. So the edge of a forest to a meadow is one of the most ecologically dynamic spaces that you can have with a lot of biodiversity, because there's a lot of species that will hide in the trees and in that edge take shelter there, but have that open meadow where they can graze or they can get nectar and then easily get away from. So birds, butterflies, you know, larger mammals, deer and stuff in the wild will use these edges. But here we have a couple of examples of an edge. So here and here we describe as songbird habitat. Songbird habitat is going to be your bigger sort of screening plants. We tend to use a lot of natives. So we're going, and we also are building our songbird habitats with layers, because songbirds like to kind of move through these areas as if they're a ladder. You know, they can find shelter, they can find a little bit of berries here, and they can put up here if a predator comes. So they like these ladders, and our ladders go all the way down into these areas that are more meadowy. And that these meadowy areas are going to be filled more with flowers and nectar plants. And we call these, this would be an example of a butterfly meadow or a butterfly habitat. So a butterfly meadow is going to be more grasses. A butterfly habitat is going to have more host plants for butterflies to be laying their eggs on. And there's crossover between these two sections. But this area of edge right there and right here, this is a native grape. And we kind of just let the grape kind of wander through this butterfly meadow. Because it'll provide nectar and food for birds. And again, we just, our maintenance team will work on sculpting it and shaping it so that we can still have some of these meadow plants and flowers popping through. So we are always thinking about putting in a diversity of plants, but also putting in a diversity of planted area types. We tend to use a lot of grasses because they provide shelter. And so we're always thinking about, for our gardens, providing food, water, and shelter for plants. And a lot of what you see here is the food and shelter. So there's nectar. The songbird habitat is going to have plants that have berries in it. There's lots of places for birds to hide. And then as pollinators and butterflies and other things like that are moving into these lower meadow, butterfly meadow areas, they're also providing food for the birds that will come down into these areas and eat and hide. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of diversity of species, of native plant species and other types of plant species that we are incorporating that are providing, again, nectar as well as being host plants. So butterflies like the monarch, for example, that likes to lay its eggs on milkweed because the caterpillars like the milkweed. That's a common occurrence all over the butterfly world. And there's a lot of different plants that specific butterflies want to lay their eggs on. So we try to incorporate those plants into areas where there's also a lot of nectar plants and shelter plants for butterflies to live on. So we're trying to just like provide all of the resources for all of the things. You know, the ecosystems are a complex web of things. And, you know, we are creating butterfly meadows and pollinator meadows to be food for songbirds as well. So we want them, and we want them in the landscape, but also just part of that larger ecosystem means that they're going to be eaten by the birds, which we also want. So we're trying to just do all of those things within one space, but that also within this space and in this garden that we're looking at, if you're to just sit and hang out there and be quiet for a while, you're going to see a lot of butterflies, you're going to see a lot of birds, and you're going to see a lot of activity in the garden.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I love the concept of just, you know, letting nature do its thing with minimal help. Although I know this is an awful lot of labor involved here. It looks gorgeous, this garden. So
thank you.
I have a question for you here regarding the dry stack. I know you had mentioned that because of moving water through to the ground and, you know, spreading laterally, how high can you build a dry stack wall without mortar that's structurally sound? Is there a magic number that maybe the Stone Institute says, okay, don't go more than 4 feet? I don't know what the answer to that is.
That is such a good question. It's a very loaded question. And it's loaded because in the Bay Area, depending on what city you live in, you're only without a permit, allowed to build a 3 or 4 foot tall retaining wall, which in most cases for us is totally fine. You know, we don't necessarily need them to be larger than that. We design around that a lot of times too, so that we don't have to deal with permitting. Although we have done permitting for walls as much as like 5 or 6 feet tall. And that process is basically about, you know, just demonstrating that it's going to be structurally sound, which we easily have been able to do over the years. Part of my training in 2007 was going to Mallorca, which is an island off the coast of Spain, near Barcelona. And that area has a tradition of building dry stacked stone walls in order to terrace the hillsides, a lot of hillsides on this island, in order to terrace them for agriculture. And so the part of the training that I received when I was there was to reconstruct like 300-year-old wall that had had some damage. And we pulled apart a section, and it was a 20-foot tall wall. So really, there isn't a limit on how tall you can build these walls. In Japan, the castle walls are more than that, the foundations of the structures of these castle walls. So, and they're all dry stack. Again, they're following there's a lot of basic principles, 1/2, 2/1, lean your stones in and this kind of thing, but they can be structurally sound, last hundreds of years, and be, I guess the biggest one I built was 20 feet tall. I could say that. I've seen them taller.
My goodness, 20 feet, I'm guessing it's like a retaining wall or something on a.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I don't know.
On a
why
mountain,
anyone-
basically a retaining wall on a mountain. And again, it was in order to do what we're doing here, which is to, you know, this is a slope. You can see if we were to extend that slope, it came out way close to the house. So we excavated all this soil all the way back and put in a retaining wall so that they would have more space. So yeah, just retaining, basically, just to create more space. I mean, it could also have been built out, right, so that you would have more space up here, which where I was working was what was being done. It was they were built, you know, there's a slope and you build this retaining wall way out so that you have more space, more usable space up there.
Alrighty, well, I mean, those are all the questions. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for giving this fantastic talk. Do you have any closing remarks or ideas to share with the audience before we sign off here?
I not really, none that I've thought out in advance, but well, it's really for me, this is really fun material to be sharing with others. So I'm super excited to have the opportunity to do that. So thank you, Linkso, thank you, Can, and you know, we are here working not just to build gardens for people, but to also like spread the message and help people and encourage people to build more ecologically sound and stable gardens. And I guess my closing thought and the message that I keep trying to push out into the world right now is that our gardens need water. They need water. So please reject this idea of not watering your garden. You don't need to overwater your garden. So there's two extremes, you know, there's too much water and not enough water. And there is a happy medium in there that will keep your garden this lush, this beautiful, and this green without using a lot of water. This garden does not need a lot of water to look like this. You can use drought tolerant plants. You can use them in combination with each other. You can also just, again, use the water that's falling on your property, put it into the ground to secure that water in your soil so that you don't need to use as much water. There's lots of other things that you can do. And we are here and available to help you out with that. And so, yeah, thank you for this opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Andrea, again for being here. And thank you, everybody, for attending. Our class will be online, posted by tomorrow under community resources. So look forward to that. If you missed it live, it'll live in our archives. Well, thank you. Thank you, Andrea.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.